Good morning friends, my name is Nikhil K. Gowda, the Political Science and International Relations faculty at Insights IAS. So today we are going to discuss few questions of the step up test series in that regard related to international relations and governance part. Now the seventh question in the question paper, it says that the violence against women and the overall development of women are interlinked. So here we need to address the demand of the question. If you look into what is the demand of the question, the examiner is asking you to show that how violence against women, it impacts the overall development. So here the keywords is violence against women. So what kind of violence we are speaking about? Sexual harassment, domestic violence in that regard, the acid attacks in that regard. This all comes under the ambit of violence against women, rapes in that regard. So how does this overall impact the development of women? So here when we say development, it can be political development, it can be contributing their economic development, it can be also to their personal development. So here we can start the answer by saying that according to United Nations Population Fund in that regard, 2/3 of married women in India, they are subjected to or they are victims of domestic violence in that regard. So in this regard, you can say that how this basically impacts. One, you can say it has health impacts. So you can give examples that women who have been subjected to domestic violence face various injuries in that regard. They go into depression in that regard. They suffer from various kind of disabilities. You can give the example of acid attack victims. Then you can speak about the other impact is the economic cost. So many women, because of the violence in that regard, there is a sense of fear in them, and they lose out, the working days in that regard, and they do not come in open with regarding to being more independent in that regard. And third one, it was also psychological as well as emotional impact. This results in loss of self-confidence in that regard. This results in women being subservient to men in that regard, and many fall into depression in that regard. And it is not only women who get impacted, it is also children. So you can say when a child witnesses the domestic violence in that regard, the kind of exercise of power of one gender or the other get instilled in their behavior. So most of the time the women children, they who witness this violence in that regard tend to become more submissive in that regard, and that kind of overall development of the child in that regard. And not only that, it has long-term impact on society. Since there is a popular saying that since the house is the first school, or people develop their values from homes in that regard, many kind of these violence leads to development of not only women children, even men children developing the attitude, patriarchal attitude towards women. And then you can go on to give reasons that why India witnesses a lot of violence against women. One, you can say the issues with law. Since there is a lot of clarity on many domestic laws in that regard, it becomes very difficult to establish evidence in the court in that regard, and most of the times the conviction rates are very poor in India. Second one, you can see that in most of the cases, why the case drops is that the accused is known to the woman, and you can also give example of certain laws which are more patriarchal in nature. For example, IPC section 375. It is related to marital rape, because marital rape has been not criminalized in India till now. And the other thing is also that women have been historically subjugated and a kind of molded. As we say, gender is more of a social construct in that regard, which makes women, believe they have to be submissive to men in that regard. They have to tolerate the violence of the men in that regard. And cultural norms. Culturally, within Indian society, many times wife beating or violence against women is accepted, or people who have very poor knowledge regarding such kind of violence goes against the idea of gender equality. So these are the various reasons for violence against women in that regard, and what can be done in that regard. What would be the suggestions? One, it needs to bring gender sensitization programs. Then we can also ensure that there is laws needs to be strengthened, and you can give the example of protection of women from sexual harassment at workplace in that regard. And also the other point is trying to promote schemes such as Stand Up India scheme or these kind of schemes to promote women entrepreneurship, which will in a way provide financial independence. To women. Fourth one, you can link the National Commission for Women can play a key role in addressing, starting up various kinds of cells to address the issue of sexual harassment in that regard, and trying to develop special call centers where women can call up and speak about their mental trauma which they are going through in that regard. And in this regard, you can give also the example of zero FIR police station, that FIR can be filed in any part of the police station. So these are the measures that can be taken to empower the women, and you can say empowering a woman is empowering a nation in that regard. The progress of a nation depends upon to what extent women are empowered in that country. So friends, these are the points which you can bring about, and these are the examples what you can link for this particular question. But the overall demand of the question is that you have to showcase in your answer that how violence against women is going to impact the overall development of women, and not only women, of the society, of the country at large. Now let's move into the 8th question, which is based on international relations. I'll read out the question, then we'll see what should be the demand. The question says that the synergy in India-US relationship has not yet turned into symphony in that regard. So the keywords is synergy, and they're asking it is not turned into symphony. What do you think are the factors which are withholding? Factors which are withholding the potential bonding between the two countries. So they're asking is that what are the limitations in India-US relations. So friends, you try to go by the keywords in that regard. That will enable you to get hold of what is the demand of the question, and you will have content to write, because any basic reading you will have many points to write. So synergy means what? In recent times you can see India and US have a lot of common elements or a common framework in that regard. But however, for some reason they are not able to be on the same tune, create a symphony in that regard. So they are asking what are the factors to it. So they can be economic, political, technological, etc. So how do we address this question? So you start with your answer, try to give a good introduction in that regard. In introduction, you can write, in 21st century, finally the world's oldest democracy has met the world's largest democracy in that regard. So you can write, from estranged democracy they have become, they moved towards a global strategic partnership. And here write one small paragraph regarding that how or why the two countries are coming close to each other. You can write about the rise of China, democratic values, belief in a liberal world order, these can be seen as the synergy which is emerging between India and United States of America. But the main demand of the question is asking why it has been not translated into symphony. It means what are the factors which are preventing both countries from speaking in the same tune. One, you can speak about trade wars, the tariff barriers or differences. Here you can give the example of generalized system of preferences and removal of Indian goods from it. Second one, you can also speak about the H-1B visa, which United States of America has tried to limit the number of Indians entering into H-1B visa. Then you can also speak about the divergence between the both countries with regarding to conception of Quad. So India's conception of Quad basically starts from the Arabian Sea all the way up to the shores of United States of America, where United States of America sees the idea of Indo-Pacific more of a construct of from Bay of Bengal to Pacific Ocean. And fourth one, you can also speak about the two countries have differed over its relations with Russia. You can speak about S-400 and Katsa. And you can also speak about both countries also differ with respect to their global policies in that regard. For example, India is taking more of a principled, distant stand with regarding to Ukraine as well as West Asia. Whereas United States of America wants India to play a greater role and take a firm stand with the Western countries in that regard. But then you can also say that, however, in spite of the differences in that regard, there is a lot of potential for the both countries to cooperate. One, you can say that both can enhance their cooperation with respect to artificial intelligence in that regard. Second one, you can also see both can work together to form multilateral institutions and organizations such as I2U2, which they formed in West Asia in that regard. And third one, counter-terrorism can be one thing which can bring both countries closer to each other. So finally, in the conclusion part, what you can write is that you can add a very nice quote for this question, or not a quote, a proper constructed conclusion saying that the future of India-US relations will depend on to what extent US can accommodate India's national interest in its larger geopolitical strategy. So this you can use as a conclusion, friends. So try to make your conclusion or introduction, a bit attractive, bit solid in that regard, apart from the points which you have to write, because this is where you can score 1 or 2 marks extra compared to others. So you can pre-prepare certain introductions, certain conclusions, because for IR, you can guess what are the issues which will come in the exam. So with this, let's move into the next question in that regard. Friends, let's move into the 9th question in that regard. Let us see what is the 9th question. The ongoing crisis in India's neighborhood. So basically the keyword is the ongoing crisis in India's neighborhood. They say that presently presents several challenges. So you need to mention about what are the challenges presented by it, as well as the opportunities for India. So this is the demand of the question. So here if you break down the question, here first you have to tell what are the important developments in India's neighborhood or the crisis. So you can speak about the crisis in Pakistan, that is the fall of the government, the election of new government, the economic crisis which is going on in Sri Lanka, the return back of Taliban with respect to Afghanistan, the Rohingya issue with case of Myanmar. Okay. So these are the ongoing crisis. Now you need to link these things with respect to what are the challenges which presents it. You can take one challenge, give one example. So I would suggest you start with a very good introduction. You can say former Prime Minister Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee once said that India can choose its friends but not neighbors. Hence, any development in the neighborhood is going to have implications in India. Then you try to write in one paragraph what was the ongoing crisis. So in ongoing crisis, you can write about, mention that the economic crisis which is happening in Sri Lanka, the political instability in Pakistan, the growing refugee crisis in Myanmar regarding Rohingyas in that regard. And you can also read about the takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan. So once you mention this crisis, then directly come with a subheading trying to mention, or you can draw a map, South Asian map and try to indicate the Taliban issue in Afghanistan, try to indicate the Sri Lanka's economic crisis and Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. Then you come about what are the challenges. One challenge, biggest challenge for India is the rise of China. Since these countries are becoming more unstable in that regard, their dependence on China is increasing. That is why there is a popular saying that today South Asia, the universe of South Asia has seen the birth of a second sun. No longer India is the only sun in the solar system of South Asia. The second challenge will be the burden of refugees. So you can write about the Rohingya refugees in that regard, and now in Afghanistan the refugees which are piling up, in Sri Lanka the refugees, it is going to have an economic burden on India in that regard. Third one, you can also look into, because of this influx of refugees, it is also leading to the increasing problem of insurgency, and give examples in northeastern states in that regard. And fourth one, with change of scenario of return back of Taliban in Afghanistan, there is a probability of influx of terrorists or Pakistani sponsored terrorists into Jammu and Kashmir. Fifth one, you can also say it impacts trade. Since Sri Lanka is going through an economic crisis, 30% of India's tariff container and 60% of India's transshipment happens through Colombo port in that regard. And then you can also speak about all these issues are also going to impact SAARC as a regional organization. But at the same time, every challenge is a source of opportunity. Now, what are these opportunities presented by this changing scenario? One, it's an opportunity for India to actually, provide an alternative. For example, Sri Lanka has fell under China's debt trap. Now, this brings to the fact that India can highlight that what are the problems of taking these lopsided deals with China, where India can come out with better deals in that regard. Second one, it's an opportunity for India to extend its soft power. So we have seen that India has been extending soft loans to Sri Lanka in that regard. Tamil Nadu government sent rice consignment to Sri Lanka in that regard through our humanitarian opportunities. And third one, this also provides an opportunity for India to try to reach out to those powers who had an adverse opinion on India. For example, you can see the Sri Lankan government to a certain extent had an image of India is trying to interfere too much. Taliban and India didn't share a good relations, but current opportunity is that we can improve, we can restart a negotiation and start afresh in that regard. And fourth one is that this also tries to be a test for India's leadership in that regard. Since India is aspiring to be a regional power as well as a global power, because we have applied for a permanent seat in UN Security Council, now this provides an opportunity for India to show that it has the capacity and the capability to help the neighboring countries when they are going through crisis in that regard. So in this regard, you can write in way forward that what India has been doing. With respect to Afghanistan, India is trying to engage with Taliban. Then with respect to Myanmar, we are following a twin track approach. What do you mean by a twin track approach? We are trying to negotiate with the Myanmar military junta. At the same time, we are trying to talk towards re-establishment of democracy in Myanmar. And with Sri Lanka, we have offered 1.9 billion loans to Sri Lanka in form of credit lines, currency swaps. And with respect to Myanmar, India has accommodated 40,000 Rohingya refugees in India. So you can end your answer by a strong ending saying that the current ongoing crisis in India's neighborhood presents a litmus test for India. Litmus test for India to emerge as a regional and a global power. This is how you can write in your conclusion. My handwriting is not good, but you try to present it well. So with this, friends, let's move on to the next question. Friends, now let's move into the 10th question. The 10th question says that analyze the impact of India's domestic issues on neighbor. So the keyword is that we have to analyze what is the impact of India's domestic issues on its neighbors. And not only neighbors they are asking, as well as its partners. And they are also asking you to suggest steps to mitigate this negative impact. So this is asked for 10 marks, 150 words. So there are three important parts you have to answer. One, the neighbors, the partners, and the steps to mitigate. So here it is simple, the question. Try to say in the introduction part that in 21st century, there is no clear distinction between a domestic policy and a foreign policy. A lot of domestic issues influence the foreign policy, and certainly in case of India. Now then try to say that how our domestic policy has impacted the neighboring countries in that regard. So one, you can again categorize into positive impact and negative impact. In positive impact, you can mention about that how India's domestic policy of vaccine production has enabled India to supply vaccines to neighboring countries such as Sri Lanka, the vaccine Maitri program in that regard. Second one, you can also say domestically India has connected various Buddhist sites, that is the Buddhist circuit. This in a way has benefited India to build close relations with Southeast Asian countries, that you can give as an example. And third one is that we also brought one nation, one grid, that is the energy production as part of South Asia. That is also able to have a positive impact, that you can write as part of positive. Now negative impact, to write about Citizenship Amendment Act which India brought has created a source of friction between India-Bangladesh relations as well as India-Afghanistan relations. Then you can also speak about India's federal structure, that is the federal politics in that regard, has been a roadblock for India to sign Teesta agreement with Bangladesh in that regard. And similarly, the coalition politics also impacted India's relations with Sri Lanka over the Tamilians issue or the fishermen issue in that regard. Then you come to the partners. You can try positive impact for partners is that once we brought LPG reforms, in a way it enabled India to build close relations with United States of America, Europe in that regard. And India also brought Digital India program. As part of this, India is trying to connect with those countries which are digitally, has the upper hand, for example, Japan, South Korea in that regard. And third one, you can also speak about the positive impact of domestic issues is that since the Indian government has also brought the Make in India program, India is trying to build close collaboration with countries such as Israel in that regard, joint development of defense production. But next you have to write about what are the negative impact. Negative impact, you can sign about India stepping out of RCEP agreement because of the influence of the pressure groups in India. That you can give as an example, that India has been seen as a protectionist state in that regard. Second one, you can see we brought a domestic policy where we told 40% of the solar panels should be taken from the Indian producers, which United States of America and India had to fight over WTO this thing. And third one is with respect to the S-400, India's policy of maintaining diversification or closer relations with Russia impacted our relations with USA. Now, how to better manage this to mitigate? One, you can say with especially our neighboring countries, India should move towards integration. So here you can speak about CSEC, you can speak about BIMSTEC in that regard, regional integration. Second one, India has to shed its big brother image. And India has to give unilateral concession to its neighboring countries. And here you can give the example of vaccine Maitri. And third one, you can also speak about it is better to avoid using what you can say, ethnic sentiments in electoral issues in that regard, that can spoil India's relations with neighboring countries. And fourth one, you can also speak about India should follow strategic autonomy and try to align with countries based on its interest in that regard. So trying to bring a fine balancing between US, China and Russia in that regard. And finally, in conclusion, you can write the opinion of S. Jaishankar, the current Minister of External Affairs, who said that in the 21st century, India needs to engage United States of America, contain a rising China, reassure Russia, bring Japan and Israel into play. So basically, it's about bringing multi-alignment. So this you can use as a conclusion of your answer. So friends, this can be the answer to the question. So let's move forward to the next question. Let's go to the 19th question. The 19th question says the limitations in India-European ties could be overcome by utilizing the opportunities the current geopolitical situation presents. So analyze, they're asking. So first, there are the keywords you need to identify. One is that what are the limitations of India-EU ties? This is one part. Second part, they are telling the opportunities presented by the current geopolitical situation. So you have to mention about what is the current geopolitical situation and how this current geopolitical situation can provide an opportunity to overcome these limitations in that regard. So you can start your answer by saying is that India was one of the first countries within Asia to extend recognitions or to build relations with the European Economic Community in 1962. Since then, both India and European Union have been vital strategic partners in that regard. But you have to mention what are the limitations in that regard. So try to mention the key aspects of the limitations of India-EU relations. One, you can mention about the issues with regarding to the negotiation of bilateral trade and investment agreement in that regard. Despite 16 rounds of negotiations, we have been not able to make major breakthroughs. Second important issue is regarding the intellectual property rights. For example, European Union has been demanding for higher standards of IPR rights, which India has been opposing to in that regard. And third one, there are also issues regarding European Union has been demanding lower of tariffs with respect to wines, spirit, dairy products, which are highly sensitive to Indian domestic sector, because India feels that if you lower the tariffs, it's going to flood the Indian market and the Indian domestic producer are going to be impacted. And third one, European Union and India differ over with respect to the human rights. So here you can mention about S. Jaishankar's statement saying that the problem with European Union is that they want the world to think Europe problem is global problem, but others problem is not global problem. The case of Kashmir in that regard, they wanted to see Kashmir as a global problem, but the same issue regarding the Rohingyas in that regard, European Union was not so forthcoming. And then you can also speak about the issue of visas. There is a lot of difficulties or barriers with respect to Indians going work in Europe. There needs to be still the simplification of visa norms. And then you come about saying that what are the current geopolitical challenges which provides an opportunity. What are the current geopolitical challenges? One is the rise of China, since China is challenging the liberal world order which has been created. Second one is the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Third one is the rise of non-state actors. Fourth one is Brexit. So now you can say with the rise of China and China's assertion in Indo-Pacific brings both India and European Union closer together to build a common strategic vision. In Russia-Ukraine crisis in that regard, though there are views which are differing, but both can work together to ensuring that the Central Asia remains peaceful in that regard. And third one, you can also say about the role of non-state actors. Terrorism has been impacting both many parts of Europe as well as India, and both can work together with intelligence sharing, bringing joint resolutions on terrorism in United Nations in that regard. So we can say that what this to be realized, both India and European Union first should try to bring an understanding, try to complete the bilateral trade investment agreement negotiations in that regard. Second one, both needs to understand each other's concern, and especially European Union should allow greater market access for the Indian products entering their market. And third one is that both India and Europe have a roadmap for 2025 where they speak about 5 critical areas of cooperation. One is foreign policy, second one security cooperation, trade and economy in that regard, sustainable modernization in that regard, and global governance and people-to-people relations. And then there can be also joint collaboration with respect to the Indo-Pacific strategy, especially trying to build a security architecture in Indo-Pacific, because the UN clause and the sea lane of communication is crucial to both countries in that regard. And finally, we can say both countries also work together on ASEAN. So these are the areas through which both India and European Union can work together. On a whole, you can conclude there is a lot of commonality between India and European Union, be it democracy, be it rule of law and fundamental freedoms. So this brings these countries close together, and the future of India-US-EU relationship will depend upon to what extent that each one of them are able to understand each other's concerns. So friends, this can be your answer for the India-EU question. With this, let's move on to the next question. That is the last question in that regard. Bharat. Now let's move into the last question. That is the 20th question. The question says that discuss the impact of Russia-Ukraine crisis on India's Indo-Pacific interest. You can start your answer by saying what is the Russia-Ukraine crisis. You can say a war has erupted between Russia and Ukraine over Donbass and Luhansk region in that regard. With this, it has both regional and global implications, and implications on Indo-Pacific region as well as. Then you write about what is India's Indo-Pacific interest. So you can say India has interest with respect to the mineral resources which are found in Indo-Pacific region. India wants to maintain the rule of law, and the UN clause, that is the freedom of navigation, has to be respected. Third one, India also feels that Indo-Pacific is a strategically importance to it, because you can say that India's 60% of sea trade with the East happens through the Indo-Pacific. Then you can also see there is an Indo-Pacific is also important for countering the rising China. But now you say however the Russia-Ukraine crisis has impacted India's Indo-Pacific strategy. One, because of the Russia-Ukraine issue in that regard, there is now growing divergence between the members of Quad, because India took a principled distance stand where the West wanted India to stand with it in that regard. Second one, you can also see because the growing interest of the Western countries in the Russia-Ukraine theatre has resulted in declining interest in Indo-Pacific. Then third one, you also have in that regard the issue of strategic autonomy. Since now the political competition is heating up in that regard, it is becoming very difficult for India to take a principled distance stand, because on one hand we need United States of America to counter as rising China, on the other hand we are dependent upon Russia. Like 60% of India's defense needs is dependent on Russia. Fourth one, it also can lead to, you can say that negatively impacting India's defense, because any kind of sanctions imposed by US on Russia in that regard, it is going to impact India-Russia's defense deal. So these are the kind of impact the Russia-Ukraine crisis will have on India's Indo-Pacific. But what needs to be done in this regard? One, India needs to build a horizontal partnership with ASEAN and Indo-Pacific countries and go about building minilaterals. Second one, what India can also do has a constructive engagement with both sides of the border. For example, India can engage with the United States and try to address its concerns, what it has, to convince the Western powers in that regard. And third one, by making Russia get involved in the Vladivostok and Chennai maritime corridor, which passes through the Indo-Pacific, it is possible to bring Russia into play with the Indo-Pacific, which tries to get greater momentum in that regard. And third one, India can also deepen the collaboration with the regional powers in Indo-Pacific, not only depend upon US, there are other powers like Japan, there is ASEAN, there is Korea, all have common interest in that regard. So we can give the example Afro-Asia Growth Economic Corridor. So you can say that the current geopolitical scenario which is playing out in Russia and Ukraine does present a challenge to India, that how it is going to ensure the focus of the world remains on Indo-Pacific. So with this, friends, we have come to an end to today's discussion. I hope all of you will do the very best in the exam. Keep calm, focus on demand of the question, try to connect with as many examples as possible or dimensions as possible. With that, I am sure that all of you are going to perform well. So I wish you all the best. Take care.